Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. President Trump adding new demands in talks with Iran as he warns that the U.S. has strong military options. What's in his demands and the latest on the Strait of Hormuz. Another slew of primary races today as the Democratic Party grapples with its political direction heading toward November. How key races in Wisconsin and Minnesota could shape the general election and maybe even the 2028 presidential race. The Treasury Department issues new guidance for employer-sponsored contributions to Trump accounts. Employers will be able to contribute up to $2,500 tax-free annually. Text messages from Dr. Anthony Fauci now released. The messages reveal Fauci discussing potential COVID-19 vaccine risks for pregnant women. We have the details. What the statistics are saying 1 year after the Make DC Safe and Beautiful initiative started. Jason Blair has the numbers. The FCC is taking aim at Chinese technology from drones to robots. Now Washington is looking to ban Chinese EVs.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
As Iran pushes for compensation from the U.S., President Trump turning the table and demanding Iran pay for the deaths and injuries it has caused over the years. And the Energy Secretary highlights oil flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has the latest.
The Trump administration is now emphasizing that oil is flowing through the Strait of Hormuz and that the supply pressure on oil is easing. U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright announcing this afternoon on X, saying that thanks to the coordinated efforts of the U.S. military and Gulf allies, the 7-day average for oil leaving the Strait of Hormuz is now currently up to almost 9 million barrels per day, and that's combining with the additional 5 to 7 million barrels per day leaving the region through newly developed pipelines, bringing the total to about 50 million barrels per day. He also adds that on Sunday alone, over 20 million barrels of oil left through the Arabian Gulf region, which is above the pre-Iran conflict level. It also comes as President Trump is saying that the Strait of Hormuz is completely under the U.S. control. Here's what he said yesterday inside the Oval Office. Watch.
But we control the Strait 100%. Now, can they make trouble? Yeah, they can make trouble. But they're broke. They have no money. You know, Iran is broke, totally broke. And they're not paying their soldiers. They have inflation of 300% as of last night.
Meanwhile, as Iran is now demanding so-called compensation from the U.S. for damages during this conflict, President Trump is now saying that he wants Iran to pay for the deaths and injuries that's caused over the years to not only U.S. citizens, but also other people in the region. President Trump taking to Truth Social, announcing, quote, "Now I'm likewise demanding compensation from Iran for all of the people that they have killed and gravely wounded with their roadside bombs and many conflicts, including the families of those killed on the USS Cole and thousands of others killed in combat." He says he's negotiating all of them, making this a mandatory requirement in future negotiations. And here's what he said yesterday about that. Watch.
They asked for reparations, you might say, or they asked for money for the damage that we've done. I said, that's a good idea. Well, we're going to ask for money for the damage they've done over a 50-year period. Whether you go SS Cole or whether you go all of the people that were so badly hurt, so badly wounded or killed, many thousands of people.
In addition, the administration is also continuing to use tools to ease the oil supply pressure on the global market. For example, the White House announcing that it's now extending the Jones Act for another 90 days, allowing foreign ships to transport goods such as fuel and other agricultural products in between U.S. ports. The White House says that's to ease supply pressure and to further stabilize global oil prices. Back to you.
And as well, Iris, President Trump announcing good news with Russia because an American citizen had been freed after being held there for 3 years. Can you tell us more about this?
Sure. So this afternoon, President Trump announcing this latest piece of news when it comes to U.S. and Russia relations, saying that the American citizen named Robert Gilman, who is a former U.S. Marine, is finally freed from Russia after almost 4 years of imprisonment there. He was detained back in 2022. The President Trump on Truth Social saying that after my discussions with President Vladimir Putin, Russia has agreed to release him, very much on a humanitarian basis. We appreciate this decision and the fact that Russia asked for no one in return. No exchange took place. The president says now Robert will arrive back in D.C. tonight, where some of the representatives on the plane will also be welcoming him home. He also says that over the phone, Robert told him that he would like to have a great cheeseburger upon coming back home, and that the president, he says, he will take care of that. Back to you.
Okay, Iris, thank you. U.S. forces fired on a Panama-flagged vessel today in the Gulf of Oman. Central Command saying the cargo ship was attempting to violate the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports. CENTCOM said a U.S. Navy helicopter fired 2 missiles into the vessel's engine room after the ship's crew ignored repeated warnings to stop. CENTCOM added that the U.S. military has redirected 55 commercial vessels attempting to pass through the blockade. U.S. forces have disabled 3 non-compliant vessels and boarded 2. The U.S. Navy currently has more than 15 warships stationed in the Arabian Sea, including 2 aircraft carriers and an amphibious assault ship. Iran continues to attack ships in the Strait of Hormuz, effectively stopping traffic through the critical waterway. Florida's Attorney General is seeking internal records from the New York Times over its coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. James Uthmeyer says the state's pension fund holds about 160,000 shares in the New York Times. He says the newspaper's pattern of mistakes in coverage of the Israel-Hamas war threatens the pension fund. Take a look.
According to reports, between October 7, 2023 and June 2024, the Times admitted 72 errors in its coverage of the Israel-Hamas war that had to be corrected, and many, if not most, of those errors favored Hamas. We want to exercise our rights under New York law to review the company's internal board documents, meeting minutes, reports, and other materials to see what the directors know. The First Amendment protects what a newspaper publishes, but it does not let public companies' board ignore its shareholders.
He is seeking 6 years of board documents, meeting minutes, and internal records, warning he will sue if the newspaper does not respond within 2 weeks. Uthmeyer says this May, the New York Times falsely claimed in an opinion column that Israeli prison guards committed widespread sexual violence against Palestinian terrorist detainees. He said Israel threatened to sue the newspaper for defamation over the claim. The New York Times says it views the request as a clear attempt to chill First Amendment-protected journalism. A spokesperson told the Epoch Times, quote, "We will respond fully, more in due course." The move follows President Trump's earlier threat to sue the newspaper over its reporting on the Iran war. A legal defeat for New York City's new luxury home tax. A judge has blocked Mayor Zohran Mamdani's rollout of a new surcharge on homes worth more than $5 million. The judge ruling the Mamdani administration botched the process and caused homeowners irreparable harm. New York City published a list exposing the names, addresses, and values of more than 900,000 properties before verifying who actually owed the tax. One attorney representing homeowners called it a shocking failure, telling the court the city screwed this up. Mamdani's office says it will appeal immediately. President Trump reacting to the pied-à-terre tax, saying it will cause 100% financial ruin. He writes on Truth Social, quote, "This doesn't work in America and must be stopped now. I am looking to see if the federal government has any legal rights to avert this disaster." And the newest stock exchange in the U.S. is now up and running in Texas. Joining us now to share his insights on the Texas Stock Exchange and what it could mean for America's financial markets is Rod Martin, founder and CEO of Martin Capital. So Rod, always great to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us today. And before we talk about the Texas Stock Exchange, let me just get your quick thoughts on the latest developing situation with the Iran war. So apparently Iran is talking with Oman to try to open the Strait of Hormuz. Now, it seems to me that what this says is that the U.S. and its actions, whether you think about the blockade or anything else, that it's working, and Iran wants the strait open. But let me get your thoughts. Why is Iran talking to Oman?
Well, of course, they're across the strait from each other. And in a perfect world, from their point of view, they'd get the Omanis to join them in making the strait national territorial waters of Iran and Oman, and they'd set up a joint toll booth. That is just not going to happen. They don't have any way to enforce that, and nobody's going to stand for that. So, can they make trouble for a while? Yes. Is this the best leverage Iran has right now? Yes. Is it really all that effective? Well, as you know, we've moved around 1,000 commercial ships through the strait in the last few weeks with very little incident. And every day the blockade seals Iran's ports, and it is a day that they're losing $400 to $500 million in a relatively poor country. So this is a bit of a waiting game. They think they're going to wait Trump out on the midterms. I think they're very much mistaken where we are right now, especially after the Michigan primary last week. I think we stand in very good chance of a Republican, not just a Republican Senate, but at least the possibility of a Republican pickup in the Senate. And on the House side, generic ballot notwithstanding, the Democrats would have to win 2/3 of the seriously contested races on the ballot in November to get a majority, and then they wouldn't have enough seats to actually be able to legislate. So I think our chances are pretty good, and more to the point, I think Donald Trump thinks our chances are pretty good. So the Iranians trying to wait that out isn't going to get them anywhere, and eventually we're going to bankrupt.
And the other thing is there are a couple of Democratic socialists running against Republicans, and some people say this is good for Republicans because they believe the majority of Americans, they're not that far left. So we'll have to see what happens on that. But to your point, I mean, this deal that Iran is making with Oman, it really is irrelevant because the U.S. controls the Strait of Hormuz, and whatever happens with the strait, at the end of the day, is what the U.S. decides. So, I mean, in the end, they still have to get approval from the United States.
Yeah, I mean, if we elected Kamala, I guess this could work for them. But short of that, I mean, there's just no way that an American government is going to allow a choke point like this to become national territorial waters. It's against international law. It's against U.S. principles going back to the Revolutionary War era. There's just no way that's going to happen. And the U.S. Navy is absolutely dominant. They can harass shipping, but they can't stop it. They can raise people's maritime risk insurance. They can sure do that. But even there, the president has created a facility through the Development Finance Corporation here that backstops the insurance. And the more we roll that out, they assign Chubb to take the lead on the private side of that. The more we do that, first of all, the more business we transfer here from London, and the more the insurance risk just goes down. So you're not going to be able to price that the way they would like to. And eventually then, and by eventually, I don't mean that long, 18 to 24 months, you're going to be able to route almost 75% of the pre-war volume of oil through the strait through pipelines going to other seas. And that doesn't leave Iran a lot of leverage at all.
Yeah, that's another great point that you're raising. The longer the Strait of Hormuz, quote unquote, is closed, the more irrelevant it becomes because people will find other ways. But one thing I see Iran doing with this deal with Oman is potentially it could sort of give Iran a way to cause trouble without accountability. And you can comment on this, but it's possible that Iran could say, we never had a deal with the United States, so we're free to do whatever we want. Our deal is with Oman, so it has this excuse. What do you think?
Well, they're not free to break international law. These are international waters. They don't get to just annex them. That's silly. And it's even sillier when you consider that it's basically like, 10 minutes after the Soviets take Berlin in 1945, if the Nazis had said, and now Russia has to surrender. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So they are posturing. A lot of that is for their own domestic audience. A lot of that is because they're used to America doing stupid things, as we did at the end in Afghanistan, as we did at the end in Vietnam. And so we will win wars and then lose the peace. And they figure if they can outlast us, they might get to that. I don't think that's going to work for them here. And I don't think Oman is going to be able to get very far with this either, because it has neighbors who are awfully well armed. I don't think the UAE is going to put up with it. I don't think Saudi Arabia is going to put up with it. The only thing that might work in Oman's favor here is that the UAE is doubling pipeline capacity from the UAE across Oman to its port of Fujairah. And so, they might like to see the strait closed a little bit longer so that they have more financial advantage that way. And the truth is, however cynical it may sound, the United States is benefiting immensely from the semi-closure of the strait. The rest of the world may be sucking wind, but the United States, we are selling more oil and more liquefied natural gas from the Gulf of America than you can shake a stick at. Many cases, those are 20-year contracts. We are shifting energy's capital from the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of America, and it's going to last.
Okay, let me just give one more comment on the Oman situation, Iran situation, and then I'll ask you about the stock exchange. Do you think at the end of the day, Oman will stand with the United States in this Iran war, or do you think Oman is more of a wild card?
I don't think Oman's that much of a wild card. I mean, they may mess with us a little bit, but at the end of the day, they don't want the Saudis down their throat. They don't want the UAE down their throat. This disrupts their other relationships in favor of a country that can't make any of this stick. And Oman doesn't have a navy worth mentioning, so it's not like they can go fight the USS Bush or something. That's not going to happen. So premises considered, I think this is a tempest in a teapot. I think it's more maneuvering, mostly for the domestic audience in Iran, actually. And the truth is, every day this goes on, they're losing, as I said, about $500 million that they can't afford to lose. And yes, they're fanatics, and yes, they're going to hang on to the death. But at some point, the lower level guys aren't getting paid. And when enough of that happens, armies have disintegrated for thousands of years, and this isn't going to be different.
Okay, let's move on to another important topic. So the latest with the Texas Stock Exchange. Talk to us about why this is significant.
Well, your prior segment actually showed very well. We've got all these Democratic Socialists who are winning all these primaries. We've elected a few. Zoran Mamdani, of course, being the poster child for all this in New York. He's doing everything in his power to drive capital out of the city, because as long as I have been vaguely familiar with the field of economics, I have heard liberal economists tell me that changing tax rates doesn't really affect behavior, that they can just take as much out of your pocket as they want and you won't do anything about it. That is never, ever true. There's a reason that East Germany had to build the Berlin Wall. They had to keep their people in. Trump is building a wall on the southern border to keep people out. The Germans had to build a wall to keep them in because they were confiscating everything they had. New York, and for that matter, California and Michigan and Illinois and New Jersey and Delaware are all doing the same thing, but they can't build a wall to keep anybody in. So where are they going? They're going to Florida. They're going to Texas. And this new development in Texas is really quite remarkable. New York has been the financial center of the globe for a century, and it's absolutely unassailable. except by shooting itself in the foot. And that's exactly what's happening here. It's not just the Texas Stock Exchange, which just opened, fully opened at the end of July. That's an extraordinary thing. The two lead partners on that are BlackRock on the left and Citadel on the right. They put in probably about $100 million between them. The total raise has been $275 million. This is a well-capitalized exchange. It's a good business. And the Texas government in Austin has gone out of its way to roll out the red carpet and to keep regulations really low. So you've got that, and you've got national trading on that exchange. 2/3 of the public companies in this country can be traded on the Texas Stock Exchange. But wait, there's more, because the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange have now opened branches in Texas. In fact, one of those was a different exchange in Illinois. They rebranded it and moved it to Dallas. So even the New York exchanges are now planning their exit route. If New York just becomes impossible to do business in, and there's no question they're doing everything they can to ruin themselves, should that happen, you're going to see an exodus, as you already have since the beginning of COVID to a degree, a tremendous amount of movement of high qualified personnel and capital into South Florida, into North Texas. But it could become a flood very quickly, and you're seeing the same thing with incorporations coming out of Delaware and headquarters coming out of Illinois and California. This is really a huge development in the history of global finance, and it's not going away either.
Is there any reason that the capital markets must be centered in New York? Is there anything stopping that the current status quo from moving from New York to Texas? Anything stopping that from happening?
Well, historically, yes, because that's where all the finance professionals were. All the guys who knew how to do this stuff, who had the money, who had the relationships. New York has been the nerve center of the world. And so if you're going to do that kind of business, of course you go to New York to do it. That's a no-brainer. Well, not so much anymore, because when New York, not just city, but state levels of government, does everything it can to make itself inhospitable to capital and the free flow thereof, then people start looking around for alternatives. I think the most remarkable thing about the Texas Stock Exchange is not that it has big backers, but that one of the big backers is BlackRock, the absolute tip of the spear on pushing ESG regulations on all of us. And yet they too see the need for an escape hatch. So you're getting an accumulation, not just of capital, but of financial infrastructure and crucially legal infrastructure. Texas has rolled out a separate court of chancery, just like Delaware has, that is exclusively for business. You can get predictable results in a Texas court that is focused entirely on the specialized needs of large businesses. That's a huge development, and it was one of the main reasons to incorporate in Delaware. Delaware shot itself in the foot. So the more you have the legal infrastructure, you have the capital already there, because Texas is becoming the global center of energy. And then you throw in the financial infrastructure and the financial people, the personnel, the guys who understand it and make it happen. No, New York has absolutely no barrier to its own demise. There are plenty of qualified people in Texas, and that was the principal thing keeping New York a global financial capital.
Okay, you bring up fair courts in Texas. Maybe you can talk to us a bit more about what does the Texas exchange offer that's different from other existing exchanges?
Well, the exchange itself is really quite well constructed. What they did is they went in and said, okay, what are all the things that would make somebody not want to list in New York? And let's do the opposite. So they don't have all this ESG stuff. They don't have all these state mandates that force public companies whose shareholders want a completely different result to do what the politicians in New York force them to do. Texas has taken an incredibly hands-off position on all of that. I come back to the new Texas business court system because it really is a huge feature. Business is an incredibly specialized thing. I mean, if it's just the corner grocery, maybe not. But if you're talking about multinational corporations operating in 100 countries with really complex issues coming before judges, you need judges who understand them. Your normal local judge who mostly hears divorces and dog bite cases isn't the guy. And that was always a huge advantage Delaware in particular had over everybody else. Their unique court of chancery for the purpose of hearing these very high-end business cases. Well, now Texas has it, and Texas isn't in the business of just voiding your pay plan as Delaware did to Elon Musk. 2 different shareholder votes at Tesla and a single activist judge blocked the man from being paid for 5 years of extraordinary work. Now, that eventually got overturned by the Supreme Court in Delaware, but by then the damage was done. There's an exodus of those incorporations from Delaware, and Delaware, another blue state, makes a shocking percentage of its state budget from franchise tax on corporations that are domiciled in Delaware, but not headquartered in Delaware. That is a huge blow to them. And if this starts accelerating, like I said, it'll be a flood. You're going to see all these companies move to Texas, and it's going to be really good for the U.S. economy.
Okay, just one final question. Does the Texas exchange have the depth of liquidity, and is it growing, and how fast is it growing? Final question.
It's growing really fast. They represent right now about 2/3 of the public liquidity in the United States. That's a very big deal. They've just started. I mean, they've been open, fully open for a little over a week. The exchange itself is well capitalized, extremely well run. They've got top quality people actually running the thing, and they're actively recruiting. And they've got the state government doing everything in its considerable power to go help them recruit, because it's good for Texas. It's great for Texas's tax base. It's great for Texas's roads and schools. So, all of these things are working together in a way that you'll never get out of New York anymore. Kathy Hochul is not going to go do what Rick Perry or Greg Abbott are willing to do. She's too busy trying to destroy business. And so is Mamdani. And we saw that from another direction in the Trump cases, where they absolutely made up new law just out of the blue. And in one case, the state legislature passed a law that only applied to Donald Trump so that they could prosecute him. Well, okay, if you're sitting in a bar in New York and you flirt with the wrong waitress and it turns out she's the niece of a Democrat prosecuting attorney, you're going to lose your pay package. You're going to get bankrupted by the courts. That isn't okay. And, that's why Trump has moved as much of his business as possible out of New York and his domicile. He is a resident of Florida. So, no one ever imagined that, least of all Donald Trump. So they are creating inhospitable circumstances. Those circumstances drive people and capital to vote with their feet, and they're going to Texas.
All right, Rod, sounds good. Great conversation today. As always, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
The Treasury Department is suing, or I should say, issuing new guidance for employer-sponsored contributions to Trump accounts. The Trump administration launched the program last month. Under the new rules, employers will be able to contribute up to $2,500 tax-free annually. Employees will also have the option to make direct pre-tax contributions to their dependents' accounts. Children with U.S. citizenship and a valid Social Security number can create a Trump account before they turn 18. The Treasury will deposit $1,000 into accounts for eligible children born between January 1, 2025 and December 31, 2028. The money is then invested in a low-cost index fund tracking the S&P 500. Dozens of companies have pledged to match the federal contribution. A pre-trial hearing today in the case against Luigi Mangione, and fireworks erupting as the judge pushes back on the defense's claims that he's restricting public access to the trial. NTD's Arlene Richards was at the courthouse.
Because the Luigi Mangione case has gotten so much public attention, their attorneys filed papers with the court asking for more public access. They wanted cameras in the courtroom so that there could be a live broadcast, and they also wanted the court to make more room so that more journalists and members of the public could attend the trial. They even accused the prosecutors of working with the judge behind their back. But on Tuesday, before the proceeding began, Judge Gregory Caro gave the defense attorneys a stern warning. There was never a decision by the court to limit access to the public or the press, Caro said. There have been ongoing discussions to expand access so that members of the public and media may attend, he continued. At no time did the district attorney's office participate in those discussions. Any suggestion that the DA was involved is simply incorrect. And before closing down the proceeding without hearing a word from either side, Caro said sternly, "Any accusation by defense otherwise is inappropriate. I don't want to hear anything else about that." The judge never mentioned the request for cameras in the courtroom, but he did assure the defense that he has secured an overflow room for the upcoming trial, ensuring that spectators can follow the case even if the main courtroom is full. Tuesday was the final conference in the case until the trial starts on September 8th. Mangione entered the courtroom wearing handcuffs, sporting a gray suit and a fresh haircut. The next time he's back in court will be when the attorneys and prosecutors select the jurors responsible for deciding his fate. The judge ordered both sides to agree on questions for the jurors and then adjourned the case until September 8th, saying there will be no motions on that day. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
It's been a year since the Trump administration started an initiative to make Washington, D.C. safer. Statistics from the D.C. Police and U.S. Marshal Service are showing drops in violent crime. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has the details.
We're going to make it that. We're going to make it safe. We're going to make it smart. We're going to restore the city back to the gleaming capital that everybody wants it to be.
That was 1 year ago when President Trump announced efforts to reduce crime and beautify the nation's capital. Since then, statistics show that crime is dropping. According to the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, homicides in the district are down 44%. The White House says more than 16,000 arrests have been made since the initiative began last August.
2% of the people cause 91% of the crime. We got rid of the really bad ones of career criminals and murderers.
Here are some of the other figures the White House is highlighting alongside those 16,000 arrests. 35 homicide suspects are now behind bars, more than 100 gang members removed, 3,200 drug-related arrests, 2,000 illegal firearms seized, and 25 missing children have been found and returned home. And looking at the bigger picture, new data from the Major Cities Chiefs Association shows homicides have fallen 17% across major U.S. cities compared with the same period last year. Some of the biggest percentage drops include Newark, New Jersey, Raleigh, North Carolina, Arlington, Texas, and Baltimore County, Maryland, with Washington, D.C. ranking number 9 on the list. One of the most visible parts of the Make D.C. Safe and Beautiful effort remains the National Guard troops still patrolling the city. If you've been to Washington in the past year, you've most likely certainly seen them. The move drew criticism in October from D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser. She said, "I don't think it's legal, let me start there, for the National Guard to police Americans on American soil." In November, Senator Shelley Moore Capito said, "D.C. has been safer because of the great service of people like our National Guard." The National Guard's presence has not faded. A year later, there's still a regular sight here on the streets. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
The Justice Department has charged 4 members of Mexico's Jalisco Cartel for narcoterrorism, drug trafficking, and firearm trafficking offenses. The U.S. Attorney for the Middle District of Florida detailing the charges.
These 4 defendants conspired to traffic military-grade machine guns, rocket-propelled grenade launchers, and mortar launchers from the Czech Republic to Mexico via the United States. The defendants wanted to use these weapons in Mexico, again, against the Mexican police, the military, and the population in their attempts, and I can't emphasize this enough, their attempts to control organized crime in Mexico and to terrorize its people. And they were going to pay for these weaponry with fentanyl and methamphetamine that was destined to be smuggled into the United States.
The DOJ said all 4 suspects were arrested in the Czech Republic in June. 2 had their initial court appearances yesterday. The remaining 2 defendants are set to be extradited to the U.S. All 4 face a possible life sentence. The death toll in Colombia keeps rising, with more than 220 people now tragically confirmed dead. The nation's strongest tremor so far this century was followed by dozens of aftershocks. The United States is supporting Colombia in the ongoing rescue efforts. NTD's South America correspondent Arian Pastar has the latest.
Rescue work is ongoing in Colombia after a powerful earthquake struck the western part of the country. New video shows a man being rescued from the debris of a collapsed building early Tuesday, hours after the quake. Over 220 people are confirmed dead as of Tuesday afternoon, but the number keeps rising. The tremor on Monday is the strongest to hit Colombia so far this century. Video shows people screaming and running as entire buildings collapse.
Honestly, I thought it was a dream. I was just sleeping. Then my grandma was screaming. I was like, oh my God, I gotta get up.
The center of most earthquakes is located less than 10 miles beneath the surface. But according to an expert, this one was much deeper.
Did this earthquake occur in quite deep compared to a lot of other earthquakes that actually might have enhanced the amount of shaking in that?
Colombia's recently inaugurated president, Abelardo de la Espriella, publishing this video on Tuesday, saying he's traveling to affected regions to help with rescue efforts on the ground. The U.S. is sending support as well, with the State Department saying the Trump administration is committing $15.5 million in funding for emergency shelter, food, protection, and earthquake assessments. Now, the earthquake in Colombia was also being felt by some people here in neighboring Brazil. President Lula da Silva expressed solidarity with the victims, saying that, quote, Brazil remains at Colombia's disposal to provide support if needed. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Another slew of primary races today as both parties choose their candidates in key battleground states. Wisconsin and Minnesota are playing out the nationwide trend of DSA-aligned versus establishment-backed candidates within the Democratic Party. NTD's Fiona G. is in Washington, D.C. with the details.
The key race to look out for is that gubernatorial primary in Wisconsin. This race in this highly competitive purple swing state is where we're seeing Francesca Hong up against Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley. Hong is backed by local DSA chapters. She's also being scrutinized for her old social media posts, including calls to defund the police and cancel Thanksgiving. She has been trying to walk back on these statements. She's also trying to distance herself from the DSA, saying that she doesn't support their full agenda. Interestingly, Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez have both declined to endorse her. Those two have endorsed a slew of other DSA-aligned candidates throughout this primary season. David Crowley, meanwhile, is seen as the more moderate option for Democrats. He's been backed by outgoing Governor Tony Evers. Whoever wins the Democratic primary there will be up against GOP presumptive nominee Tom Tiffany, who has received an endorsement from President Trump. Tiffany says he believes that Wisconsin could be the firewall to prevent the spread of socialism. Watch.
I think Wisconsin will be the place that stops socialism because, I mean, I just know my friends and neighbors, including some who are Democrats. They are not crazy. They do not believe in some of these crazy policies, abolish prisons, abolish police, highest tax rates that you could possibly have.
In Minnesota, the race to watch is the Senate primary. Once again, it's that trend of establishment versus challenger. We've got Representative Angie Craig up against Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. Craig is backed by the likes of House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. She's also had support in the past from AIPAC. Meanwhile, Flanagan, she does not refer to herself as DSA. Instead, she's been endorsed by the Democratic Farmer Labor Party. She's received the endorsement of Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Important to note here, no Republican has seen a Senate primary victory in Minnesota since 2002. Now, the governor race in Minnesota is open, with Governor Tim Walz not running for re-election. Senator Amy Klobuchar is expected to clinch that Democratic nomination. And on the GOP side, President Donald Trump has endorsed Mike Lindell for the position. So 6 states today having their primaries. That's Vermont and South Carolina closing their polls at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. South Carolina is also where we're seeing the special primary today for Republicans to choose a replacement for the late Senator Lindsey Graham. His sister, Senator Darlene Graham, is in the running. Connecticut and Alabama are closing their polls at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and the latest polls close at 9 p.m. Eastern Time in Minnesota and Wisconsin. Don, the most important question here for Democrats is if they keep seeing these DSA-aligned candidates winning the primaries, can they win the general election? Many Democrats are worried that these candidates are putting off the more centrist or moderate or undecided voters with their socialist agendas and their rhetoric. Republicans, meanwhile, think this is good news for them because they believe they can win over those disillusioned voters come November. Don, back to you.
All right, Fiona, thank you for that. The Justice Department is monitoring polling sites in 2 Minnesota counties for the state's primary election. The DOJ is saying the effort will ensure transparency, ballot security, and compliance with federal law. Staff from the Civil Rights Division, Voting Section, and Minnesota's U.S. Attorney's Office are supervising polls in Hennepin and Ramsey counties. The DOJ says it regularly deploys staff to monitor compliance with federal civil rights laws in federal elections across the country. According to the department's DOJ personnel oversaw polling sites in Minnesota in the 2020, 2022, and 2024 federal elections. Meanwhile, President Trump expressing support for MyPillow founder Mike Lindell in the state's gubernatorial primary. The president took to X, saying Lindell deserves a big win in Minnesota today. Voters in South Carolina are choosing the Republican nominee for U.S. Senate. The race follows the sudden death of Senator Lindsey Graham last month. Graham's sister Darlene Graham cast her vote this morning and said she knows the seat must be earned, not handed to her.
Lindsey was amazing. I will never fill his shoes. No one can ever fill his shoes. And I don't just expect it to be handed to me. I know, again, that I have to earn people's votes, and I'm willing to work really hard over the next 2 weeks to get out to earn those votes. I want to work hard every single day for the people of South Carolina. That's why I want to do this, not to be a politician, not for self-ambition, not for power. I want to continue helping the people of South Carolina.
South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster appointed Darlene Graham to serve the rest of her brother's term. President Trump has endorsed Darlene Graham for a full 6-year term. 10 candidates are running in today's election. Among Graham's primary opponents are Representatives Ralph Norman and Russell Fry, former Governor Mark Sanford, and businessman Mark Lynch. The winner will face Democrat Annie Andrews in November. If no candidate wins a majority, the top 2 finishers will face each other in an August 25th runoff. Republicans in the North Carolina have chosen State Representative Jennifer Balcom as their new nominee in the 11th Congressional District, replacing Congressman Chuck Edwards. Edwards dropped his re-election bid last week. The move coming amid a House Ethics Committee recommendation that he be censured over his conduct with 2 female staffers. Balcom has been a state lawmaker since 2023. She picked up endorsements from Senator Ted Budd and the state GOP chair. She'll face Democrat Jamie Ager in November. Cook Political Reports rates the contest as leaning Republican. Alabama voters are also casting ballots today in special congressional primaries. 4 House districts were redrawn following a court battle over the state's congressional map. The marquee race is in District 2, where 6 Republicans are competing for a shot at unseating Democratic Congressman Shomari Figures in November. The new map was redrawn after a Supreme Court ruling on race-based districting. According to analysts, it gives Republicans a 7-point advantage in District 2. Trump-endorsed State Representative Rhett Marks is the frontrunner. He's also backed by Senator Katie Pritt and House Speaker Mike Johnson, but Democrats are urging crossover votes in the open primary, hoping to boost a weaker GOP nominee. Polls close at 7 p.m. Central Time. The Fifth Circuit has set aside Biden-era energy efficiency standards for stoves and cooktops. The Court of Appeals ruling states the Energy Department illegally refused to withdraw the rule after states objected, saying they did not have the opportunity to comment on the rule before it was finalized. Opposers to the rule said the efficiency standards would have effectively banned gas-powered cooking appliances. The ruling now halts the standards coming into effect, which was originally set for January 2028. With the AI race creating a surge in demand for huge data centers powered by natural gas burning power plants, AI data centers have become the latest target for the far left. The executive director of Climate Depot joins us now to tell us why far-left Democrats are bringing out a new Green New Deal to target AI data centers. So, Mark, thank you for joining us today. It's so good to have you. I just want to ask you, why are the Democratic Party's progressive left, why are they targeting AI data centers?
Well, they're targeting them at the moment because they're looking at it as, if you watch a Bernie Sanders rally, it's fight the oligarchy. So he turns it into sort of a class issue that goes along with the Democrat, socialist / Marxist agenda. That's point one. Point two is all of these big tech companies that have been, building these data centers used to be the biggest funders and the biggest champions of the climate movement, from Facebook and Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, et cetera. And the climate activists have a sense of betrayal. This billionaire class has now walked away from the climate agenda virtually overnight. And what that's done is it's left the climate activists rudderless. So they're freaking out, and they're now turning this into the DSA, Democrat Socialists of America, are relaunching their version of the Green New Deal in 2026. And this version of the Green New Deal is all about opposing data centers. Now, they're doing a clever strategic things there. But before I say that, let me just mention that the big tech companies, you have Jeff Bezos, who isn't even funding a third of his climate fund. In fact, I think it was Bloomberg News said it's dangerously underfunded because he's walked away from the climate issue. You have Bill Gates shutting down whole climate divisions, and he's now personally declared that climate is not a catastrophe. He's being attacked by Al Gore. Bill Gates, one of the number one promoters of climate fear over the last 3 decades, has essentially walked away from the climate fear movement. And then you have Mark Zuckerberg. He's completely walked away. He's shut down big divisions on climate that he had started with his wife, at Facebook Meta Foundations. And all of these billionaires, by walking away, have essentially left the climate left in a panic and terrified. And all of these big tech companies that had climate pledges from Google, Amazon on down are now just basically admitting we're violating every one of our climate pledges. So what the climate left is doing now is they're using good old-fashioned NIMBY, not in my backyard, opposition to data centers, which is universal among all classes, political ideology, neighborhoods. No one really wants a big project in their neighborhood. So they're using that to turn it all into climate fears. And that's what they're trying to claim, is that data centers are going to blow through our emission targets, which they are, by the way. They will blow through all these ridiculous climate net zero emission targets, and they are endangering the future of the planet. And that is what the gist of this is, as the new Green New Deal doesn't even resemble the first Green New Deal of AOC, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez from 2018, 2019, because this version is way beyond that, and it's heavily focused on AI data centers, and the whole green movement has moved beyond Democrat socialism into, frankly, praising Stalin and Mao and Marxism, just openly embracing that kind of an agenda now, where they used to hide it much better.
Okay, I want to get into more detail on that, but before we talk about Mao and Stalin, can you paint a picture for us here? For our day-to-day lives, what can we expect to see if this new Green New Deal came to be? How would that impact the regular American?
Well, what they're trying to do is basically shut down any large sector of the economy. And they see AI data centers as a great thing to shut down because it's still essentially in its infancy. The U.S. does lead the world in AI data centers. I think we have over 5,000. It's like 5,100 data centers with many more planned. the three largest, wealthiest nations combined don't even meet our number of data centers. And China is way back. I think they're under 1,000 currently. So we're winning that race, and they look at it as that's their first low-hanging fruit, is to go after that. Again, using not in my backyard, generic cross-party, cross-class opposition to AI data centers. But essentially, the first Green New Deal was hardly about climate. This new version of Green New Deal is also hardly about the climate. And the new version of the Green New Deal that's been loosely proposed so far in Congress, it hasn't, even the first Green New Deal was hard to pin down. But they're going after education. They want to indoctrinate kids, double down on that. And they're going after all sectors of the economy. We're talking about every aspect of society being regulated. They're talking about in the name of affordability, in the name of fairness. And we've seen this with the Wisconsin candidates. We've seen it with Mayor Mondavi. We're seeing it with government acquisition of significant aspects of our entire system, from healthcare to grocery stores. And what they're trying to do is couch all that into this sort of equity agenda, which again goes back to the first one, but this is much further, much more. They've progressed much further in terms of economics than they ever did before, because now they're just basically calling for government takeovers of large swaths of the economy in order to promote fairness. So everything will be run essentially like a DMV, Department of Motor Vehicle. And I think that's the biggest change. And the leaders of this movement, again, the biggest change has just been rhetorically how they're just willing to openly talk about how important Mao was and what a great leader he was, Mao Zedong, and how great Joseph Stalin was, and how we just need to embrace this, the warmth of collectivism, in the words of Mayor Mondavi. So all of that has and this is all brand new, meaning the Green New Deal aspect. It was only introduced, a version of this, like about a month ago in Congress. So it's all coming together now, and they're forming it. But you can bet, as I like to say, this is not your father's Green New Deal. This is not the same Green New Deal from 7 or 8 years ago. It's going to be much more radical, much more sweeping in scope economically. Again, they're outright calling for massive government takeover of large parts of the economy.
Okay, can you give us more examples of similarities between what they're saying and the policies under Mao, Stalin, Marxism? What are the similarities, and why? I mean, why do they think this is going to work? Openly embracing Mao and Marxism.
Well, it's the old adage, and you could hear this going back like when the Soviet Union collapsed 30 years ago and the Eastern Bloc under communism. You always had the intellectual left say, and they said this openly, well, it wasn't done correctly. Communism works, but it just wasn't done correctly there. And then you'll have people like Bernie Sanders and other Democrat Socialists of America. They'll say, like, we want, they'll try to say we want socialism like they have in Denmark or Sweden. But then you look at Denmark and Sweden, and they're basically like New Deal Democrat, FDR. They're not socialist by any imagination. In fact, John Stossel had a great investigation into that, and just recently showing how these countries were not their model. But essentially, they want complete takeovers, and they think this is their opportunity to get it. COVID really is what seasoned all of this, because prior to COVID, you didn't have widespread calling for universal basic income, which has been a huge tenet of this movement. One of the key things they want to do is get everyone below a certain income just on a government guaranteed minimum assistance. And the government would guarantee your income, government would guarantee your housing, government would guarantee your healthcare, government would guarantee your education all the way through college. So, and this is their vision economically. Now, you asked me specifically, I'm thinking of Hassan Piker and others who openly praise Stalin and Mao. Now, I've seen a lot of these progressives. I've watched a show called Due Dissidence, a guy named Russell on that show, and he got back from a trip to China, and he says he praises China for how awesome it is. They have a technocracy, they have very limited freedom, but the state provides all of these wonderful things. They have social order, they don't have graffiti, they've eliminated poverty, they know where you are at all times, and they couch that in a way that is appealing in this great forward-thinking society, and all we have to do is stop the excesses of, that little pesky thing called individual liberty and freedom. So this is how they're selling it now to progressive activists. And I'm watching very closely how they're doing it. They're painting this utopian vision of of sort of socialism / Marxism / Chinese style communism. And it really, if I was going to give you a directive, I think it's more leaning toward a Chinese style sort of command and control economy, where it's sort of state capitalism, versus the old Joe Stalin way, which I think is harder for them to defend because people in America just have a distaste for that, whereas most Americans really didn't follow what Mao did in China, aren't aware that he was probably responsible for many more deaths than both Hitler and Stalin. And so that's why they sort of use China more, because Americans aren't as versed in the history of that.
And there's a word that the Chinese Communist Party uses to describe people in the West who support what the CCP is doing, and it's useful idiots. Yes. I'll just leave it there on that. But I don't understand why these people who are supporting socialism or even communism, why they think it could be an utopia, because nothing is free in this world. I don't know. I don't understand why people don't get this. Anything you have needs to have work put into it for that thing to exist. If everything is free, then you don't have anything. It's a simple concept. But anyway, I just want to ask you one last question here. How do you see the public responding to all this?
To the DSA agenda? That's a very good question. Here's the problem. And here's why it's being fueled. I already alluded to it. This is our economy. We were rocking in 2020. Until, and I always say Donald Trump's greatest mistake as president was going along with Anthony Fauci, Deborah Birx, in the 2 weeks to flatten the spread. Once the federal government allowed that premise that we had to shut down the entire economy, and at one point we had his top economic advisor in 2020 say, we can't reopen, we have to wait till we hear from the doctors. Once you gave that up, that was a global reset. It resulted in the largest transfer of wealth from poor and middle class to the wealthy. You had the takeover of big tech, this big monopolization, centralization of power. And what that caused was a ripple effect through the economy that we really haven't recovered. You had, I think, over 60% of small restaurants went under in places like New York City, small mom and pops. Remember, you had all these big corporate chains open. So that created partially reality and partially this creation of a mindset that America was no longer fair, that it's big corporations running everything, and that did consolidate that trend. So I think what's happened since then is Americans are just lost faith in institutions. They lost faith in climate. They lost faith in public health. They lost faith in all these. And it's weird because the DSA is proposing more power to these institutions, which essentially have crippled America in the last 7 years. We really have not recovered through inflation, through cost of living, through supply chain. I mean, you can go through the whole list. America is not the same as it was pre-COVID lockdowns. And I think that is what the reason is. That also led to Black Lives Matter. That led to the whole implosion of the woke, even the critical race ideology. Even though that stuff was boiling prior to, it was all the spark that lit it. Remember, the Black Lives Matter rallies happened after months of lockdowns and all sporting events canceled. You had the cities like a powder keg looking for any excuse to explode. So what we reap is what we sow. Those lockdowns, I think, we're still recovering from. And I do think that is the number one reason for the rise of the Democrat socialism and the pushing of the new version of Marxism, and also the gullibility of human nature. They can look at the excess. They can look at the excess. They can look at the reality of Stalin and Mao and say, well, we won't make those same mistakes, but the core of what they did was correct. We'll just avoid the excesses that they went into. And that is the story of human life. Its history is just repeating itself over and over and over again with these same mistakes. And to end with the words of Walter Williams, the economist, George Mason University, who I was a student of his, and he's now deceased, but he said repeatedly that socialism compares itself to capitalism. They compare capitalism to reality and find all the shortcomings. Socialism is presented as utopia, so there's never a problem with it. And that's basically how they get away with it. And that's why there's always been an allure. They look at the reality of capitalism, warts and all. It always comes up short, any system would. And they can present socialism as a utopia, particularly to young people. And it sounds wonderful to them. And that's how we're doomed as human beings to repeat this cycle every 20 to 40 years. It's just human nature. The question is how far we let them advance with this latest cycle. And this is a major push. We haven't seen this kind of a push by open communists / socialists in America probably since the 1930s, in the United States, 1920s, 1930s, before World War II.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that, Mark. Unfortunately, human nature, as you described it, it's the way it is sometimes. But it's been a fascinating conversation today. Mark Morano, Executive Director, Climate Depot. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
The Federal Communications Commission is emerging as a major arm of the Trump administration and its actions against the Chinese regime. The agency increasingly banning Chinese technology that poses safety risks. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley joins us now. So, Jack, how severely has the FCC been targeting the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, they've put on more and more restrictions over the past 9 months. It's really since President Trump's been in office in his second term. They've put multiple restrictions on specifically Chinese technology, other adversaries too, but these moves mainly target Chinese technology, which the U.S. has been so reliant on over previous presidents. Chinese-made drones, there's a restriction on them now, routers, power inverters, robots. They've also moved to stop U.S. electronics from being tested over in China because it's cheaper and more quickly done in Chinese labs than going through all the red tape here in the U.S. So they've stopped that. And according to Reuters, the FCC is now looking at banning the import of data center components here in the U.S. FCC Chairman Brendan Carr says that there's a supply chain issue with this, with being overly reliant on critical components from China, an adversary. And also, this has been a main theme of the Trump administration, reducing supply chain vulnerabilities and encouraging domestic manufacturing. But then there's also the personal safety issue here, which is something a little bit more insidious. That's Chinese-made technology and what it can do once it's embedded in American infrastructure. Take a look.
So we're looking very systematically at everywhere where we're vulnerable to a bad actor, a foreign nation that has hostile intentions, being able to disrupt our telecommunications network, our energy supply, electric vehicles. Right, we can't afford to have any of that type of stuff. We don't need these Trojan horses anywhere in our technology ecosystem.
Trojan horses indeed. The FCC says that they've also targeted Chinese power inverters. Now, those devices convert electricity from sources like solar panels into usable power. Officials warn that these inverters can be compromised and then give the Chinese regime the ability to cut off U.S. energy systems. And then they're also looking at electric vehicles. Right now, the U.S. has bans on Chinese softwares in its vehicles. But a bill working its way through the Senate right now goes beyond just banning the software. It would ban any car or car parts, like a battery, coming from China and other adversaries being used in American companies. Now, officials warn that these bad actors, state-run actors in China, can remotely operate these batteries, causing chaos. Watch.
You've seen the videos, you've seen the stories of these batteries that are heated up and exploded. And if you don't think for a minute that it is a national security threat to allow the Chinese to dominate an industry in which they no longer can sell cars here in the United States because of what we're doing here today, but they could remote incinerate a battery, the CCP, if we were to allow these cars that come in here, could take over the steering, the braking, and the acceleration of your vehicles.
Now, this bill is the bipartisan Connected Vehicle Security Act that passed its committee, the Commerce Senate Committee, unanimously, with Democrats and Republicans all in support. It's now heading for a full vote in the Senate. So a lot of hope there, likely to pass to ban all car parts and cars coming from China into the U.S. Back to you, Don.
All right, Jack, thank you. Democratic socialism is on the ballot in the primary for Wisconsin governor. Meanwhile, Republicans are holding a special GOP primary for the Senate seat of the late Lindsey Graham, with Darlene Graham receiving the backing of President Trump. Joining us now to discuss is Mike Leon, Director of Strategy at the Free and Equal Elections Foundation and host of the Can We Please Talk podcast. And we have Tony Kinnett, national correspondent for the Daily Signal and host of the Tony Kinnett Cast radio show and podcast. All right, guys, good afternoon. So good to see you both. Tony, may I start with you today? So, I mean, it seems like some of these Democratic socialist candidates, It seems like they're actually straight up socialists. And if you look at the DSA website itself, you take a quick look, it says they want to get rid of capitalism and private ownership. I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but this is socialism, if not communism.
Yeah, and again, and it ventures into communism when you again start restricting the rights of individuals to actually get out of that system or to own any kind of property or actually express any kind of individual rights, as we see a lot of individuals, including Francesca Hong, calling for, at least in her interview with Hassan Piker. And this is a real issue, though. They have a lot of really bad ideas, of course. And that they say, as soon as you call them on that, they say, oh, I just want Medicaid or Medicare for all. You're supposed to just pretend that that automatically fixes everything. And again, none of this has anything to do with Republicans, but these are the candidates that they're putting forward in the primaries. And they perform super duper well in university towns. In every other traditional demographic in the Democrat Party over the Obama coalition years, they do very, very poorly. That's a recipe for disaster in the midterms. The problem is that Francesca Hong seems to be a weird mix of Abdul El Sayed and Haley Stevens. So she has kind of the socialist promotions of Abdul, and then she has the lack of any kind of charisma, SNL character vibes that Haley Stevens did. So this is a choice. And yes, I think the other young man who's running is a far better candidate. And I'm as eager as the rest of you to see how Wisconsin turns out.
So, Mike, I want to hear your comments here, too. Do you feel these Democratic Socialist candidates, what they're saying, has striking similarities to socialism/communism?
Obviously, I disagree with you guys. So first off, good afternoon. Let's start there. I think I do agree with what Tony just said about they do win the primaries and they do win in university-led towns because there's more college-age demographic of people that are voting. And obviously, as you get older in life and you start to balance a checkbook or things like that, you start to lean a little bit more conservative in terms of where your tax dollars are going. So I agree with that just at a high-level premise. Here's where I disagree. There's a couple things with Wong, first off, that she has walked back, abolishing prisons, talking about, defunding the police. Those are things that obviously more centrist Democrats, even myself, like prisons are necessary. The big business of prisons is something that we should be tackling. That's a different story and how they're privatized. In terms of defunding the police, no, police need better training, but they also need to be held accountable. They don't need qualified immunity. So there's a middle ground in between there, and Wong and those type of candidates need to start messaging like that in terms of getting votes. Now, here's the other thing. I think Hassan Piker is way overblown. This is Joe Rogan 2.0, Theo Vaughn 3.0, with respect to how many people are inflating this person as if they're a mouthpiece for the Democratic Party. They're not. Just like James Carville wasn't. Yeah, are they influencing at times? Of course. Is he affiliated at all with the Democratic Party? No, we're overblowing Hassan Piker. I don't even have the platform that he uses to talk to the collectively 3 million people that he talks to. So I think we're overblowing a little bit of that. I think these candidates need to start identifying ways that Mamdani has won in New York with respect to tackling rent freezes for rent-controlled apartments for first and second year folks, how he's gotten money back from landlords that have not kept up their share of the building and the housing codes, how he's done things for universal child care. Message on those things. Those are winning issues. Those are things that people support. That's what Mamdani has done in New York. And it's emphasize the democratic part of the socialism, to you guys' point, so that it doesn't veer eventually into communism.
Okay, Tony, your thoughts on Piker and what Mike is saying, that Hong walked back some of her policy comments.
So I know that Hong walked back the hating Thanksgiving thing because how embarrassing and how childish and petulant as the rest of her policies. And again, when it actually boils down to what it is that she promotes, I'm looking for the policies that are explicitly moderate. And when you prompt her to say the kind of things that Mike suggested, she won't say that. When you prompt the other DSA candidates to say those kind of things that are more on the moderate Democrat position, they won't say that. They're all in on the most extreme position because, again, as Hassan Piker said, and we'll get to why he matters in a second, well, as Mamdani also said, what purpose do prisons serve? And Hassan Piker saying that abolishing prisons are necessary because, after all, we all think about raping and murdering people, don't we? I mean, my God. I mean, that's a horrifying thing to do and to say. But the reason that Hassan Piker is being counted as a serious individual here, he goes up on stage with the other candidates. I run a show here, which you can currently maybe hear the thunderstorm starting to blow in, so we'll hope the power stays on. And if I started getting carried around to big campaigns around the state and around the country, what I say to my audience becomes relevant and applicable to the candidate in question. That's how that works. There's no sidetrack here where we can say, well, it doesn't really count because after all, he's just a young scamp who's really energetic. No, he's being brought up on stage with Abdul. And then when you say, well, you're bringing him up and you're using his influence, are you going to push back on some of the things he says? Abdul says, well, actually, cancel culture is really dumb. No, again, I'm sorry, but the DSA planks are the exact same thing that Hassan is saying, and they are running as DSA candidates. I don't get to run as a member of the Freedom Caucus or the Tea Party and then say, well, I'm really just a regular Republican after I win the primary. No.
Yeah. Can I ask a question on that? So wait, Don, can I ask a question on that? So by Tony's logic, Donald Trump is a Nazi supporter because Donald Trump had dinner with Nick Fuentes and never really disavowed.
Did he have Nick Fuentes on stage?
Public comments. He went to dinner with him.
Did he have Nick on stage? He had so showing up to a dinner. If Hassan Piker showed up to one dinner with here, no, let's take your logic all the way through. I didn't say had one private dinner at a table with, walked away and said that Nick guy's an idiot. That's my distinction here. He's campaigning on stage with Abdul El Sayed. That's not having one dinner and then calling him an idiot. That's a little different.
I'm not disagreeing with that. What I'm saying is the transitive property has to carry over to the Republican person that is doing the exact same thing.
In the apples to apples and oranges to oranges.
Tony, having dinner is a more intimate thing than being on a campaign stage in front of 20,000 people.
Are you
just do photo.
Okay,
Tony, I'm just saying, by your logic,
I said,
this is your logic. This is not mine. I didn't bring this up.
Doing the campaigning, then it's different than showing up at a dinner. Nick, we have all of the transcripts and the text messages about why Nick showed up to that dinner. Trump talked to him for like 15 minutes, said, I don't like this kid, and then got rid of him. That's different than saying I'm not gonna get rid of Hassan Piker, and you know it.
But it's
Mike.
Yeah, but it's the same. It's the same thing. Go ahead, Don. I want to move on. It's the same thing.
Okay, Mike. I was going to ask you. You disagreed in your first response there. I want to know where is the line in your mind between democratic socialism and pure socialism? Because Hong is a DSA candidate. On the DSA website, they say they want to get rid of capitalism. So where's the line for you?
The line for me is the first word in front of socialism. The line for me is democratic. It's the line for me that Tony just said. I'll piggyback on it. That you have free and fair elections. So that way, if that person's policies, if they're petulant, to quote Tony, if they are petulant and they don't work, 2 years later, that person's removed from office. That's where the line is. Now, in terms of how socialism plays with capitalism and some of the things that Syed has said about, universal childcare. And again, it's not about what you say during the campaign cycle. I've said this before. I'm going to say it again because it bears repeating. Government is a group project. Anybody can say anything on the campaign trail. Donald Trump said, credit card, this is a direct quote. Donald Trump, when asked about the $44 billion of credit card debt that Americans are going through, he said, credit card debt is so bad, you vote for me this November and no more credit card debt. That's what he said during a campaign stop at Bedminster. That's a direct quote that you can go look up, Don. Has credit card debt been eliminated from Americans? No, of course not. So therein lies the problem. You can campaign on anything, but when you get to government, to Tony's point, and those petulant ideas that you do have that tend to win over younger voters, you realize you need buy-in from the other 99 members of that chamber, in this case, a simple majority if the filibuster is eliminated, et cetera. So will some of Syed's policies and stuff like that go through? No, it's a little bit different than Mamdani, who's the mayor of a locality. Like these are different things. People don't have that basic understanding. So what they want to do is they want to say this person is socialist and it's going to lead to communism. And we came from a communistic country and this is how they did it. And it's the exact same thing. It's not the exact same thing. Because it's not the exact same thing. I know my dad left in 59 with my grandmother on a boat. It's not the same thing. I know what Castro did and how he converted that into a communistic state with respect to a dictatorship and carrying on the legacy with his brother Raul and then now Diaz-Canel as president. They're not the same thing. These are not the same things. I'm living proof that it's not the same thing. What I will tell you is the line for me, Don, is the democratic part. The line for me is about free and fair elections and being able to, these progressive policies, which by the way, we all agree, Tony and I agree, there are some things that are just not feasible on a federal level to be implemented. You can try certain things in a locality, maybe even at a state, depending upon where that state leans, and with respect to budget dollars. But there are certain things that you probably can't do from a federal perspective. You can't federalize certain things. Let those ideas, if they win out in an election, let them fail on their face. And then you campaign on the failures. But when I saw a GOP strategist in this Political article that everybody can go read about the GOP has a new boogeyman, and it recently came out. And the guy said, the Republican strategist who was not named in that piece said, this is real easy for Republicans. Say, you don't like what Mamdani's doing in New York? El Sayed's going to do that. Easy campaign message. Well, it's not easy because Mamdani has gone after landlords in the city and gotten money back for landlords. He's worked with and getting budget for universal childcare. Those are the things he campaigned on. Working families, issues for working families. I can't afford my rent and childcare is too expensive, so my wife has to stay home and take care of the kids. That's what he campaigned on. That's what he's doing. New Yorkers like it. Like, I couldn't believe my eyes. And no wonder he didn't put his name to it, because it's a stupid idea. That's not what Republicans should be running on. They should be running on their platforms, the big, beautiful bill, and how it will actually impact and help you. They're not running on that because the boogeyman is what that article says it is, the socialism part. I agree with you guys. There needs to be a distancing from the DSA overall platform because there's a bunch of things I don't agree with. But to use Mamdani as this national example is a bad example. He's actually doing things that he campaigned on. Is he doing the radical things, some of the things that he talked about? No, because he realized he can't do that. Some of those things you can't enforce. Government's a group project. So get off the ledge. Government is a group project. If the ideas went out in November, let them fail on their face, and then you can campaign against it in a couple years.
All right, Tony, go ahead.
So I have an issue with the two. The differentiation on the line, a lot of things with socialism are irreversible. So, for example, Francesca Hong, Zoran Mamdani have called for the nationalization, the government ownership of certain industries. Once you take part of that, and again, I'm sorry, I know you can hear the storm in my microphone. I apologize. Once you go forward and you actually claim those industries as government, they never go back. That's never something that is easily reversed. It has never been done. And it is something that we saw in Cuba over the last century, that as American industries were nationalized, it created a disincentive for any kind of growth, any kind of innovation, and things stalled. Shout out to the 1950s cars that are sold 1950s cars. And so when we actually look at the furtherance over the next couple of years of socialist policies, when you have Francesca Hong saying she wants to nationalize certain industries through the leverage of the state, I mean, you can say, well, that's just a campaign promise, but what it is that you are promising shows me your direction. Again, when Zoran Mamdani said, I'm going to provide universal childcare and we're going to do it cheaply and affordably, and then it turns out he comes before the public and says, well, instead of $2 billion, it's going to be $4.5 billion because I was wrong and I'm bad at math. That's been every single policy proposal Mamdani has brought forward. He says, we're going to have all of this money, and then they don't have all of the money. And then either Kathy Hochul bails him out, or he goes back to the drawing board because he doesn't have anything here. So far, the only things he's really been advocating for are closing down Rikers, abolishing a prison, and then also trying to get violent criminals released from jail because he doesn't like the individual's background who was arrested by the police when his wife called in the domestic dispute. That's an issue. Now, again, I'm willing to talk about some things that Mamdani has done on regard to like the national crime trend downward across the country and what role he's played in that. But that's not what's being advocated here by these socialist candidates. And some of these things, once you begin down those roads, this is why I had a huge issue with, for example, the Trump administration buying stock in Intel. I don't like it. The government sucks at running businesses. They're very, very bad. If Intel can swim, great. If not, they should sink. And I do not believe that a socialist candidate wanting to nationalize businesses is something that is, well, it's just democratic because in 2 years, hey, hesto presto, it'll all go back to normal. That's not how that functions. And that's just the economic business government relations side of it. We can also look at other socialist organizations and countries around the world, the famous Scandinavian countries, that stopped some of those state-run procedures and dealt with a small economic mini recession. We saw this in Norway. We saw this in Finland because those countries attempted some of these things. It didn't work. And so when the government stepped back out of that business realm again, private industry just didn't magically snap fingers and start and hop to. And it's something that I think a lot of Americans are concerned. When Zoran Mamdani also promotes himself as the head of the party, it is an effective strategy to say what Zoran Mamdani wants to do there, he's going to do here. It is a cultural disconnect to the rest of the country. Again, according to articles from Politico, to the New York Times, to the Washington Post, to the conservative side, the New York Post, to the Fox News articles, have made it clear black voters, Hispanic voters, traditional union working class voters, they hate this stuff. They don't care for it. They're old enough to know their history. They're old enough to know that they're not being in the black voting caucus, the Congressional caucus, and the Hispanic caucus. They feel abandoned. The breast milk of the DNC has dried up and it has been instead repackaged over for the socialist candidates. It's a very serious issue. And so when I'm thinking about the socialism brand, how do you separate from the DSA planks? You can't, because there's nothing else of substance there than Abdul wearing a tight t-shirt and going, I'm a manly man. Look, I'm working out. I just don't know if I see enough substance beyond that actually is going to do anything as a senator. He literally says that he wants to get to the Senate so he can tell Donald Trump his hands are small. Okay.
All right. So, Mike, a few things here. A few things. So to Tony's point, once you vote in socialism, it's hard to vote it out. This is historical record. And what Francesca Hong is saying, it gives a direction, a sense of direction of where she wants to go with her policies. Another point that Tony is making. And I want to ask you, Mike, are Democrats now normalizing certain policies that in the past they would not have considered?
Well, the way you framed the question, I'm going to have to agree with, because there is some normalization, but it depends on the policy. So let me just go back a second to what Tony said about Mamdani. If Mamdani is campaigning on, hey, New Yorkers, you can't afford your rent. You have to make a choice between your wife. By the way, Mike Leon had to make this choice. My wife got out of working because childcare is too expensive in New York, right? Childcare in New York City right now, full-time childcare in New York City averages between $1,600 and $3,500 per month. That's about $19,000 to $42,000 annually per child for daycare. Now, I live in Westchester County, about 20 miles from the city. Little bit cheaper there, but rent prices haven't stabilized. Childcare is just as expensive. Maybe not as, but just as. So if he comes out with a plan, again, I don't live in New York City now, lived in New York City before. He comes out with a plan and he secures $1.2 billion in state and city funding towards universal childcare expansion that includes 2K and 3K. That is a winning issue for people out there that are going through those struggles of allocating paycheck resources to that. They have to work extra shifts. Who does that tend to impact? It tends to impact Black and brown, of which your boy is both. My dad's a black guy, black Cuban guy. My mom's Puerto Rican. So like that tends to impact the lower wage communities, right? Because we need some type of government help. That's what the platform is about. The government should be working for you, against you. I agree with what Tony's saying about once you take full control, it is tougher to relinquish that control. There's no disagreement there. There's tons of examples. Tony's right about Cuba and the 50s vehicles and the Russian technology, or lack thereof, that is with respect to inundated in Cuba. So I totally agree with that. I'm not disagreeing with that. What I'm saying is that for the voters out there right now, and especially voters that have gone through living just above the poverty line, they're not technically in that middle class. There is that little class. Everyone knows this, where it's like you get to like that, you make 70, 80K a year, you make 100K a year, you don't qualify for certain programs, even though you are struggling because you're a family of four, your wife doesn't work. There are tons of examples of that. It's not really a middle class, but it's the type of voter that these folks are talking about with respect to their policies, because they have lived this life. Hong has worked in the restaurant industry, which everyone knows bottoms people's out because they rely on tips. Matter of fact, President Trump ran on that because he knew Nevada had a huge service industry and he knew the casino industry was like that. So where did he go? He took his no tax on tips, even though it's up to $25,000 capped. He took that and he ran on it because it's an issue that's affecting everyday people. That's what I'm talking about. When the choice this November, if she's able, obviously, to win the primary and get to the general, the choice this November is candidates like that are trying to implement those type of programs. Here's the issue, Don. And it's not that we're making a mountain out of a molehill. It's that there's not enough of them to overwhelm the system of Mike Leon's point earlier, that the government is a group project, because they're still the centrists. They're still even some of the folks that are center right that would be like, I don't support that bill, because getting that legislation passed is still tougher when it goes through the state houses, and especially at the federal level when you have to go through the chambers of Congress. It's a group project. You have to have some type of moderation. You have to have some type of Joe Biden here. I can't do the impression, but compromise, and that's what government is. So again, I love that people are coming up and trying to poke holes in the campaign pie in the sky. And I get Tony's point about it lets me know where you lean. The problem is, back to that Republican strategist, we have the examples of Mamdani of what it looks like. Obama was said that he was a socialist. We have the examples of Obama. Okay? Once you get to government, you can't implement, at least here in the United States, I'm not going to talk about other countries, you can't implement something that you campaigned on because it's a different processes, local, state, federal. And that therein lies the issue. So to point to Mamdani, who has done some of the things, and Tony, I hope you're okay with, I hear the thunderstorms really loud and clear. There is a storm coming, by the way. Maybe it is democratic socialism. But it's a microcosm. But this is what I'm talking about. You can't point to Mamdani when he's campaigned on certain issues that working families are affected by.
And then he's failed to do a lot
delivering.
of it. Well, he's not, though.
I just read. He's securing that funding. Go ahead.
Okay, so this is the issue that I have is I dislike the idea of, well, it's a win because he's trying. He campaigned, he's trying. I'm sorry, wait a minute. Isn't Donald Trump trying to do a bunch of things right now? Some of them are working, some of them are absolutely not. I'm not coming out to you and saying, well, Donald Trump, he's tried for the American people, ain't he? No, that's ridiculous. Mamdani is supposed to be an adult and the mayor of the biggest city in the world. This isn't high school experiment time. There are a ton of different solutions that you could propose from the Republican side of the aisle, the centrist, the libertarian, the green, the moderate Democrat, the corporatist, the technocratic, et cetera, to come up with a solution for problems that New Yorkers are facing. Mamdani's thing has been tried before. It's how we got apartment complexes that burnt down during the World Series in the 70s. We saw this before. We've done this before. We haven't tried the big deregulation push in New York City. There are immigrant bodega owners who are currently getting ready to file a massive lawsuit against the Mamdani administration because his state-run grocery store idea is going to screw over all of the private businesses in the neighborhoods of those state-run grocery stores. And that's the issue. I can't give him praise when he says, I'm going to try things. Well, yeah, those are bad ideas economically that are not sustainable in New York, and they're certainly not sustainable in Wisconsin. And I think that's where that argument really carries weight and merit.
But Tony, just to piggyback on that real quick, Don, wait, just to piggyback on that real quick.
Just one final comment on this issue, and then we'll move on to the Republican primary.
Yeah. So just to piggyback on that, I'm against the grocery store idea, even though it's a pilot program and one in each borough. I agree with you, Tony. I am against it. The problem is, you say he's trying. No, he has actually done. He's enacted a rent freeze. I'm reading this right now. He's enacted a rent freeze for 1 and 2 year leases on roughly 1 million rent stabilized apartments through the Rent Guidelines Board. He's recovered $34 million in tenant settlements across the 5 boroughs where landlords have failed to meet the compliance of the lease that they've engaged in with the leasee. He now has secured through Hochul, like you mentioned, he did go back and try to ask for more, but he secured $1.2 billion in state and city funding towards universal childcare expansion, introducing full day 2K and 3K seats. And he's recovered $9.3 million in restitution for exploited workers and small businesses. This is not including that suit that you mentioned about the pilot program with the bodegas, which I'm just hearing of. But what I'm saying is that you're saying he's trying. No, he did, campaigned on. You can't afford your rent, right? You can't afford childcare. Let's do something about it. The government should be helping you with that.
And I told you, we've seen this before.
Those are the things he's doing.
We've seen these policies. We've seen the 70s. And again, with the pilot program, he just came out this last week and said it's way more expensive than I thought.
Correct. So let it fail. Then campaign on that it failed. That's what I'm trying to say.
And it's not on the burden. If I'm in Wisconsin, I shouldn't go, let Mamdani fail and then let that fail here too. No, thanks. I'm not going to go with that. That's why it's not just hearsay. It is fair for Democrats and Republicans to go, I don't want Mamdani out here because I think it's going to fail.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's just quickly get one more comment from each of you on the South Carolina primary. So I'll start with Tony and then I'll end with Mike. So Trump's endorsement plus Lindsey Graham's legacy. Tony, do you think that's enough of a boost for Darlene to win the Senate seat?
I think so. I think it's likely that you're going to see that. I know that Russell Fry has a little bit of momentum. Same with Ralph Norman. There's a touch, but I think that, again, with Darlene, with the statements that she's made, I haven't seen a lot of negative press from Republicans in the state of South Carolina. I think that she'll probably do pretty well today. Now, Trump has had a couple of non-wins. He's had a couple of losses in the primaries of his endorsements in the last week, breaking his record. I doubt that this will be one of them, but I am going to be keeping an eye on it tonight. I'm just happy to see they make the seersucker suit in a female cut. I didn't realize that was a thing.
Okay, Mike, your final thoughts. Trump's endorsement plus Lindsey Graham's legacy. Is that enough?
Well, I hope it's not. And this is why I was opposed to this when Gavin Newsom did this. I forget who it was that passed away, and he appointed some political lobbyist to a position. Darlene Graham has not been in public office. Like, look, I get the sentiment of trying to do something for your family and carry on the legacy. I would hope that South Carolina voters would want somebody that's a little bit more qualified in that seat. Especially Ralph Norman is a perfect example of somebody that's already represented the state at a different level, even though it's on the federal level. Like, I don't like when these type of things happen. We have a lot of instances where a family member, either a close relative or somebody in the immediate family, tries to run for the office seat. Again, anybody can jump into American politics. Obviously, our president used to be a reality TV star and worked in real estate. So clearly anybody can do it. I just would like a little bit more of experience and chops, back to my overall point of how government works and an understanding of it. Not the hearsay, to quote Tony, of your brother complaining about the issues in D.C. I would rather somebody else that's actually dealt with the troubling waters of D.C.
All right, let's see what the voters think. Mike, Tony, always great conversations with the both of you. Thank you so much today.
Great to see you guys. Stay dry.
Thanks, guys. Stay safe.
There's Mother's Day in May and Father's Day in June, and today it's National Sons and Daughters Day. If you're a parent, plan something special for your child, a trip to the park perhaps, or their favorite meal. If they're grown, take the time to call or text them. Be sure to remind your son or daughter how much you love them. Time with our children can be fleeting. Spend quality time together, create memories, and enjoy every day you have together. If you all get together, snap a photo and share it on social media using the hashtag Sons and Daughters Day.